All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sajin Bhakta, and I'm here with Dr. Amelia Aldo, who together we will be presenting today on something a little bit different than the traditional academic material, but a little bit of content and material on how to look for careers outside of traditional research, clinical practice, in academia. And so we're really excited to be here, and we'll get started, and I'll let Dr. A introduce herself.
All right, so hi everybody. So setting up my, okay, there you go. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dr. Amelia Aldo. I'm super excited to be here today. Just to give you a quick overview on my background, which we have here on the slide. I was a psych major in undergrad. I got involved at Penn. I developed a passion for research very early on, so I got involved with lots of research as an undergrad. That took me down the path of getting a PhD in clinical psychology, which I did at Yale. I primarily researched emotion regulation in anxiety disorders, mood disorders, and eventually moving on more and more transdiagnostically. Primarily, I was an experimental psychopathologist. That's a very long-winded way to say that I basically brought participants in the lab and put them through very interesting stressors and taught them different ways of regulating their emotions. I did my internship here in New York City at Cornell, New York Presbyterian, primarily a CBT internship with some very interesting side pockets of psychodynamic training as well, which is a very prevalent theoretical orientation here in New York City. So happy to chat about that too. And then in terms of my career, I skipped postdoc. I went straight from internship to being an assistant professor in the psychology department at The Ohio State University. I was a tenure track professor for about 4 years. I had a lab, I had grad students, and once again, continued to do work on experimental psychopathology on emotion regulation. Through a number of things that, and I can talk more about this later at length as well, but just a combination of getting to a point in my career where I wanted to do new things, also wanting to make different personal choices in terms of wanting to continue living in New York City, which is something that I had done throughout all this time. Again, one thing led to another one, and I ended up making a very difficult choice of leaving academia. And again, I can go into more details about that later. And I went into management consulting. So I worked for Boston Consulting Group, which is one of the big management consulting firms. And basically I spent 2 years there. I worked on a very incredibly random assortment of projects, very little to do with psychology or healthcare or mental health. I actually did marketing, I did pricing, I did sales, and across a number of industries. Primarily I worked in financial services, so banks, credit cards, that kind of stuff, and also consumer goods. So I did things for consumer electronics, for the fashion industry, for the food and beverage industry, and things that I had no idea about before going into consulting. It's a very quick, fast-paced environment, so you pick up very, you learn about new disciplines and new industries and new areas very, very quickly. Which is a little bit of the opposite of academia, where we spend years and years looking into a narrow set of topics. So after that, I stayed there for about 2 years, and then I left and took a bit of time off. This coincided with having very little kids, lots of things being, up in the air and chaotic as that happens when one has kids. Took a few months off, and then I decided to sort of pursue two things, which is basically what I've been doing for the past couple of years. My primary job during the day, I am the director of a private practice here in New York called Together CBT. We do CBT for anxiety and mood disorders, and we serve clients in New York, New Jersey, and a couple of additional states. It's primarily a training clinic, meaning most of the staff are postdocs and graduate students. So it's a really fun thing for me to do because I get to do clinical work, which I love. I was just with a client, that's what I was a couple of minutes late. I get to do clinical work I love, but I also get to teach students, grad students and postdocs how to do therapy, right? So all kinds of supervision, and it's very rewarding. And I also do a little bit of supervision in some of the schools in the area. So Columbia, Yeshiva, and also at Mount Sinai Hospital. But those are, things that I do for a couple of hours a week. My primary thing is really to run my clinic. And then so basically I probably do my clinic work like a good 70% of the time, you say 70 to 80%. And then the other 20%, I do a number of consulting engagements that vary. So right now I'm primarily working with a company doing virtual reality exposure treatments, which is fascinating. As I mentioned, I'm a CBT therapist and I specialize in anxiety. So of course, I've done a lot of exposure over the years. I still do that on a daily basis. But exposure, as those of you guys who do this type of work, it's very challenging to do and it's very time consuming and it doesn't scale easily. You need to have a lot of really good training in CBT and a lot of experience to be able to do it well. Many times we hear clients come in saying that they did exposure with a therapist, but it didn't work. And then when you ask, they didn't really quite do exposure or not in a way that made sense or was systematic. So I'm actually really excited to be sort of working on, technology-based solutions that might actually help us scale a lot of the right ways of doing exposure and helping people with their anxiety disorders. I think that basically covers it. And then I love doing this type of workshop panel. I'm doing something similar for ABCT in the fall. I did one of these last week for CUNY here in New York. So I'm very excited to always talk about my career paths and also to keep learning about other people as well. So if you have questions today, happy to answer them. I know we're doing small groups later as well. But if you have questions down the line, if you have questions in a couple of months or sometime in the future, feel free to reach out. This is something that I do on a fairly regular basis and I really love doing it. So, all right, I think that basically covers my whole intro. So I'm gonna pass on the microphone.
Thanks, Dr. A. It's so wonderful, again, just to hear your background and just your journey. It's so fascinating. And it's been great collaborating with you on this workshop. So hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Bhakta. I have a little bit of a different background. I started off, I did my undergrad also in psychology. At the time, I thought I was going to go on to become an ER doctor. And then I got my first subpar grade in organic chemistry, and my whole life fell off the train tracks, it felt like at the time. But of course, it worked out just perfectly and just for the best. So then I pursued a master's degree in criminal justice. I thought I was going to go on to be a lawyer. And while I was in the program, I had an emphasis in forensic psychology. And what I learned in that program was that there was not enough literature and not enough focus on cross-cultural, multicultural, global methods. And what I found was that in Western psychology, we were using a lot of Western tools to measure and assess populations that came from diverse backgrounds and contexts. So I realized that I actually wanted to pursue my PhD in psychology instead. And I focused mostly on cross-cultural methodology, and my research was in neuropsychology. So I was able to blend that. For my dissertation, I focused on validating the NIH neuropsychological cognitive battery in India, because the NIH's toolbox is available royalty-free on an iPad. And in India and many developing countries, there's a significant shortage of clinicians as well as those who are qualified to practice neuropsych. And so I thought if we could take the assessment that was developed here in the West and validate it for the culture in India, it would bring much needed care for the population there. And so that kind of just launched me on into my career. And so I like to say I'm an international psychologist, really passionate about making sure that we are not transporting copy and paste interventions, copy and paste assessments, evaluations, and that we're taking a very indigenous approach to understanding the reality and the lived experiences of the various populations that we aim to support. So I started off pre all of this, I developed a nonprofit organization, which we'll chat about a little bit later, called PovSolve. And PovSolve was founded in 2010 with the primary mission of alleviating poverty around the world. So the organization has since done various projects. We've built schools in Africa, hospitals, water wells, orphanages all around the world. And it was really a non-traditional entry point into psychology. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but even for my first faculty position, you can only imagine how it was for the dean and the provosts and everyone to be asking questions about, this isn't the traditional, normally it's bachelor's, master's, PhD, internship, postdoc, and then faculty. And so I really enjoyed that. I still support the organization on the board of directors, but I'm not actively involved still in the leadership. Then while I was in graduate school, started off in business operations as a veterinary hospital manager, which was just really intended to be a little job on the side to fill my time. And that actually launched to be into my career. And now I work in consulting in the veterinary space to provide wellness, compassion fatigue, anxiety, burnout, all of that good stuff that comes with a career in vet med, especially when our clinicians are constantly exposed to death and trauma and euthanasias. And so it's been really, really wonderful. Position is consulting in marketing and sales and revenue and cost management and things that have psychology, but I was able to utilize the theoretical and foundational frameworks from my graduate program to understand how adjusting various levers were going to produce metric results for the business. And so it's been super, super exciting. I've really enjoyed my time at People, Pets, and Vets. I'm currently in the process of transitioning into a full-time professor position at a medical school, and then I will be remaining on as a consultant part-time. So I am actually in the opposite direction of Dr. A. I am now going into full-time faculty and going to be doing consulting on the side. And so really our goal today is to be here with you guys and make this as interactive as possible. We know, unfortunately, Zoom fatigue is very real. So please make this dialogue interactive. If you have questions, I'm not sure if someone is monitoring the chat, but feel free to put them in there, or we'll definitely be discussing at the end. So that's a little bit of background about me, and I'll kick it back to Dr. A to get us started.
Wonderful. Can you hear me okay? My earpods are not. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. I need to swap them for my other set. So yeah, so, one of the things that, just give me 1 second. Yeah, so, one of the things that we wanted to sort of like start thinking about is, in the type of firms, right, that we've all been to, that you guys are into, there's a very, very strong emphasis, right, on the clinical track or the research track. And so much so that it's usually even framed as a dichotomy, right? Are you doing research or clinical? Which is, that in itself is not true, right? It's both, or it could be both for some people or at different times. Oh, that moved. Can we go back to the previous slide? Awesome, thank you. So one of the things that we wanted to sort of like start thinking about as well is that there's actually a lot of other things to start thinking about, right? So looking into topics of human resources, right? Most of us in most firms don't necessarily have IO classes or learn much about IO. It's a huge area, right? There's a lot of psychologists who are employed in those type of settings, both formally and sort of in a more of a consulting type basis. Other areas that we don't think about as much or we don't connect as much are sociology, social psychology. Related to that, also public health, right, which is obviously incredibly important in recent times. Things like employee behavior, and also things like workplace wellness. And these are things that are very, very, very adjacent to what we do, whether it's research or clinical. They feel like they're very sort of far away or removed or different because, you don't, it's like, I can't do public health unless I have a master's in public health, right, an MPH, or I can, go work for a company and help them with wellness programs because I didn't specialize in IO, right? And I think we create a lot of like mental barriers for ourselves in the setting, and that's sort of what we wanted to start here with, like starting to think of, you know, things that are very adjacent, very easily accessible, right? These are professors, researchers, other grad students who are in your department or in the public health school across campus, right? Or things in the business school that, again, they're not necessarily that far, right? It feels really far away, but these are sort of things that are very, very close by. And those are things that I think could be useful to start thinking about as we expand our horizons. Next slide. And do you want to take it, Sajan, or are we doing one of
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll happy to take this one. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So for the next one, I agree definitely with Dr. A. I think in research academia, we create silos, allowed, or we can only do things within our hyper focus. And for those of you who are currently in doctoral programs, of course, there is a heavy emphasis on your dissertation and becoming an expert in a certain topic. And I think that's really important. But in order to become well-rounded, I think it's also important that we step outside of the controlled lab. And for that reason, implementation work and research is really, really important. I think for anyone considering a career outside of research, outside of academia, I encourage all of my students to look and really develop robust qualitative methodology skills, because it's very, very important to be able to utilize those qualitative skills to understand behavior outside of a lab or outside of a controlled study. Of course, large-scale implementation is really important. I think moving from academia or practice into a position in corporate America or in business operations is really, you're not going to be asked of how can we improve the well-being or how can X intervention impact Y in an individual, but rather how can this be done on the macro level? How can we create impact on a large scale? So begin looking for faculty at institutions who are conducting research on large scale other tracks such as marketing, advertising, consumer behavior, and knowing that you are able to work with those faculty and even peers in those departments, because of course psychology it touches many departments and many disciplines, and so I think we should leverage. So I think psychology research, because psychology touches. And so keep an open mind, especially if you know your plans after graduation are to leave academia or research. Think about what that discipline involves.
All right, my turn. So it's like, okay, so these are some of the things, you know, again, and thinking as a behavior, you know, we were both thinking as behavior therapists, and a lot of the change and the meaningful change, right, takes place with small changes, small incremental changes over time. And particularly in light of, you know, PhD careers where you guys are in school for 4, 5, 6 years, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you can keep doing in the background to sort of begin to prepare yourself to explore different careers, right? And none of these things is going to create any fundamental change overnight, but these are sort of like gradual steps that you can take with like an hour or 2 or whatnot of involvement every week that over time are going to accumulate tremendously, right? So one of the other things, for example, here that I love to talk about and I love doing this stuff is actually science communication, right? And you don't have to become, you know, science communication is a great way of sort of like building your presence, building your brand, connecting with people, finding opportunities, getting job offers or getting opportunities to interview for various different jobs. And again, you don't have to sort of like start, you know, the next best selling or, you know, the next best selling book or the most popular blog or the most popular YouTube channel out there, right? You don't have to like win the internet to have a meaningful social presence and to do some very good science communication. So if you haven't already joined Twitter, I know many of you are on Twitter because I know you from there. It's low cost. You don't, it's low cost from the perspective of like low investment. You don't have to do anything. Just join it, start following people whose work you're interested in, and every once in a while start sharing some of your thoughts. Start by retweeting other people, and then perhaps like retweet by quoting a tweet and adding a little bit of your content, and then creating your own content and starting to see what works, what doesn't work, what kind of things that you post about do other people like, and comment on it, what kind of things do other people not like, right? And again, you could start really doing this just by spending like a couple of hours a week or even less. And how much time do we actually spend mindlessly like scrolling through our phones, right? So this is something that you can do in sort of, instead of spending a lot of time like scrolling through Instagram, which you should do anyway because it's fun, but mostly you're just gonna be seeing a lot of ads for a lot of like, I don't know, sneakers and things that you may or may not need. Again, I do it all the time, but spend some time doing other things, spend some time on Twitter actually connecting with the academic Twitter community. That could be really, really helpful. And it's not just academic Twitter. I mean, there's a lot of people in industry and across a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives who are going to be there and that you're going to be able to connect with. You can then take that even a step further and be like, okay, maybe write a blog. And again, a blog could be something that you do on WordPress or you do on Medium. And maybe you write a blog once every 2 months. So maybe you write 5 or 6 a year, right? You don't have to be like churning out blogs left and right. You're not going to become, unless you really want to. The goal here is not for you to become like an influencer, right? Or to make a living out of your publications and, and your blogs and your videos, but it's really about sort of increasing presence and opening up opportunities. Maybe if you are into, making videos, you can venture into YouTube. I've done a bit of that. It requires learning a lot in terms of how to make videos, how to work with sound, how to work with lights. But if that's the kind of stuff that you find fine, again, it's a bit more time intensive. The editing also takes time, but that is also something that you can try. Same with TikTok, right? A lot of the videos on TikTok are very casual and made in a second, and a lot of them also have a lot of thought put into them as well. And we see that there's more and more therapists who are actually on TikTok these days, and it's also a really great source for disseminating a lot of information. And then there's LinkedIn, and then again, you can share all of the stuff that you're posting on all these other platforms, whether it's Twitter or blogs or YouTube or TikTok or something else, and post them on LinkedIn, right? And continue to sort of create create a presence for yourself. And go on LinkedIn if you haven't. I know so many of my academic friends don't have a LinkedIn or have one that they only have like 50 friends or 50 connections and never use them. Go sign up for it and start using it. It's an incredibly valuable tool. It's not big for a lot of academics, it is true, but think of all the people that you know in your life or that you've met who are not in academia. Think of all your friends from college or friends of friends or people that you took classes with, or even right now in grad school, if you have friends across other schools, people in the law school, people in B school, people you went to high school with, right? So if you actually think about it, there's probably a ton of people that you know in your life that are not necessarily in our bubble of psychology or in our bubble of academia. And LinkedIn is like a fantastic way of connecting with them, because then you can actually go on and actually post. You write a blog about psychology and something interesting about science dissemination, and then you put it on LinkedIn, right? And now you begin to create a brand about yourself in terms of being not only a scientist, but also a scientist who's communicating and disseminating science, right? And then next thing you know, a friend of a friend who is starting a startup and they're looking for somebody to do some of the mental health, like product development, or they're looking for guidance in that, they contact you. And next thing you know, you have an informal interview for a part-time role at a startup that can bring you like, a nice amount of cash during the summer, while you're in school or something else, right? So, and that stuff you can do today, right? You can go today and sign up for Twitter and become more active, sign up for LinkedIn and become more active. Those are probably the two that I'd say. After today, everybody go on Twitter, go on LinkedIn, sign up, find me, friend me, friend Dr. B as well. I'm sending friends your way. Friend everyone that you've ever met and that you've ever crossed paths with. You know what I mean? It's a total no regret move. It will take an hour or two of your day. And you'll be like extremely well more connected from a professional standpoint than you were yesterday or than you were earlier today. So that's a bit of homework for everyone. I think we're going to throw a lot of homework at you guys throughout the session. So that's the first piece. Yes, anyway, so that was sort of like the main point that I wanted to raise here as well. In addition to science communication, right, there's like all the stuff that we can do on the quantitative side as well. Yes, we're not programmers, most of us. I'm sure some of you guys are quite good with, Python and R and many other things. Most of us are not, right? But we understand a lot of the logic behind statistical modeling and things that are very sophisticated, to really grasp. So finding ways of collaborating again, you're not going to be the statistician on a team in industry, most likely. Most of you guys may not, but there's a lot of ways of actually thinking of ways of how can you collaborate with people who are building statistical models or like forecasting models. And again, this could be in finance, right? It could be quantitative trading and quantitative based trading. This could be people in startups writing, programming different products as well. There's a number of startups right now in the mental health space that are doing artificial intelligence in language processing. So there's a lot of ways that, without you having to go and become an expert in any of those areas, that you can find ways of sort of getting to know what some of the people in those areas are doing as well. So again, this is a matter of reaching out to your stats professor, your stats DA, other people that you might know in again, across the school as well, just to get a sense of what are the different opportunities as well. So I'll pass the baton to Dr. B for the next slide.
All right, sorry about that. I'm back. Hopefully you can hear me better. Yes? Okay. Absolutely really important information, Dr. A. I think to continue on some additional steps that everybody can take, professional organizations related to your interests. I think a lot of people wait until they're at the very end of a graduate program to begin looking at organizations that they want to join. Fun fact, a lot of professional organizations offer free or very discounted membership for students in programs. So get involved. I think a lot of what I would say my launching pad was really just joining different divisions within the APA as a student member, running for various office positions. And then it really grew my network from there because it really was able to connect us together. Of course, then look for mentors in the fields you're interested in. So I'm sure many of you are conducting literature reviews on a regular basis. Don't be shy to reach out to those authors. If an interesting article crosses your desk and you are interested in that work, or maybe you just want to know more, it's a really small community, right? I mean, there's a lot of researchers and psychologists out there, but just ping them and let them know you're interested in their work. Of course, they will be flattered to know that you're really liking their work, and maybe ask them for formal mentorship or even informal mentorship. It's just perhaps guidance, or maybe you want to go that direction with your research, but you have to put yourself out there. Connecting with people who have similar goals, I think, is really, really important, both within your department and institution and beyond. I think that it's important to look beyond where you're at as well. And like Dr. A mentioned, platforms like LinkedIn, ResearchGate, things like that are going to help you build those connections. And then identify the key skills that you need to gain, such as data science or programming, or what it is that you're going to need to at least have a working understanding of before you have that first call, right? If you're passionate about, I don't know, social determinants of mental health, and you're not really familiar with public health statistics or epidemiology, maybe before you have your first meeting with an epidemiologist who you really are admiring and want to be your mentor, maybe you should brush up on those skills to really put your best foot forward and help them know that you're willing to invest the time into that self-learning. Because unfortunately, if doctoral programs were designed to teach us everything that we needed for the real world, we would be in the program for our entire life. So we would never graduate, there would be no commencement ceremony, and we would forever be students. So know that some of it is a little bit of the personal, you have to take that personal initiative, and then look for non-traditional internships. I think this is my absolute favorite part here, is that you should, when you are ready to begin looking at summer internships, or if you have a lighter course load, look at jobs in the corporate sector, within NGOs, things that don't have the word psychology in the title. Because if your goals are to go into this different industry, it's really important that you dip your feet in from the very beginning. And so, you know, there's a lot of consulting firms out there that look for summer associates, that are already doing wellness programming and well-being programming. Right now, I'm looking for mental health clinicians and an internship, and I've seen social work practicum students apply. I've seen masters in psych apply. I've seen PsyDs, and I love to see that because everyone has a different background. And then, of course, the government, NGOs, there's organizations right in our backyard, so you don't have to up and move to a whole new city. But really the key, again, it's just in line with that. Don't get caught up in, you can only look for internships that are focused, laser focused. So I will toss the mic back over.
All right, I'll take it here. So yeah, one of you know, some of the ideas as well, right, is sort of, and again, we, you know, this is probably a lot, but you don't have to do it all today, or all at once. But other things, freelancing. Everybody wants free labor, right? It sucks, right? In some ways that is true, but like, reach out to people, reach out to organizations in your school, in the town where the school is at. Maybe you're lucky enough and your school is in a bigger city. So there's like more people, more jobs, more companies, right? More NGOs, more opportunities, and offer your free services as well, right? And as a way to then start doing like paid free. So when I think of freelancing, I think of like free freelancing and paid freelancing, right? And if you start doing some like quick pro bono freelancing work, is the best way to then, you know, if they like your work, once they ask you for a bit more, you can very easily say, okay, well, you know, after a certain amount of time, like this is my fee, this is my hourly rate, and it becomes a very, very easy transition. And if it never transitions to that and turns into a paid gig, at least you made some connections and you got some good experiences out of that. Related then to that is the idea of community service and volunteering. And again, particularly many schools are sort of in very rural areas, right, or near small towns, and you're never too far away from people who may be, you know, in rural, in underserved areas, who would not get any type of access to any type of, you know, good services when it comes to mental health or just behavioral coaching or anything that is like remotely right on that sphere. And if there is not an organization, go and create it, right? And that's the other thing. It's like, you know, you guys are incredibly creative as a bunch by definition, by the type of work you do. So if you can come up with new hypotheses to test, you know, about human behavior and design complex studies to do that, you could easily, right, set up an organization or a club or something, you know, in that vicinity, especially if you're doing community service, especially if you're doing stuff for free for the community. You can totally do that. So don't sit around also and wait for for the right opportunities to come to you. You can also create them, right? Along the spirit, you know, collaborate with people in other departments. Again, this is a big regret that I have, and I mention it all the time. When I was in grad school, I was so laser focused into psychology and my research that I missed out on so many opportunities to connect with people across disciplines. And it made no sense. I was there for 5 years, right? And maybe not something to do in your first year or your second year. Maybe you want to buckle down, focus on the research, get a good sense of what you're working on, you know, get your master's thesis off the ground or even completed. But there's nothing really preventing you in your third year, your fourth year, your fifth year to actually, you know, broaden your horizons and set up collaborations. And it can be as easy as like, look up the professors in the other departments, right? Whether it's like law or business or computer, computer science, all the stuff we have in here, and tell them, like, if the research is interesting, tell them that you find the research interesting and you would like to come chat with them and learn more about what they're doing, right? When I was a professor, that would happen to me on the other end, like students who would be in other departments, and I'd be like, why do they want to talk to me? Like, I'm the anxiety person, right? And I always said yes, and I always talk to them, right? So don't underestimate, right, that professors are super interested in talking to people across a number of areas and disciplines, so yeah, many of them are not going to respond or tell you that they're busy, but you'll find some who may want to engage, and then that's another way of sort of connecting, right? And we don't do that. We think that we can only talk to people in our department or in our area, right? So put yourself out there, in all these ways. Get creative as to how to cement relationships beyond the psychology department. Coursework, additional coursework as well. Those are things that you can always do, whether it's an actual class you're taking or more of an independent research or student-led research course as well. And then other things to also get involved and think through a bit more. This is not something that I've done, but I know some people have, and obviously Dr. B has as well, is getting more involved with things like program evaluations as well. That is actually something that has a lot of real world implications as well, and it's like another very nice thing to branch into. And again, I haven't done, I wish I had. So this list here, I feel like it's a little bit of like all the things I wish I'd done, and as we were writing it together, that we wish we had done in a way. And I think the spirit of it is like, look around you, take a moment to think of like what else is going on in the graduate school, what else is going on across campus, what else is going on in the town, what else is going on in the city where your school is at, and think through what other ways in which you can bring your knowledge, bring your passion for psychology, for mental health, for therapy, for science, into ways of collaborating with various people and organizations who may be doing other really interesting stuff. And that can be really fun, and it can be really rewarding to then be the one psychologist on the team. I'm not technically a psychologist yet, you're in grad school, but one day you will be the psychologist, and it's like, it's kind of fun to be the one psychologist in the team, because then the sense of value, the value that you bring into that, and the sense of satisfaction that comes to that is exponentially higher than when you're in a group with another 10 psychologists, which is also fine, obviously. But it's like a different way of connecting professionally, and I think it's very fun.
Thanks, Dr. A. I think one thing I will add, to a lot of my experience is in program evaluation. And so I think it's possible to marry a few of these bullets. So before I advance, I think you're trained on research. And are you able to hear me? Oh, okay. So you're trained on research, and you're able to work with, if there's a community service organization in your community, let them know, hey, I'm a graduate student and I would like to volunteer to do a program evaluation on the services that you offer. Like right there, you're able to volunteer, you're able to practice your qualitative and quantitative evaluation methodology skills. And these things are going to make you really marketable once you graduate, because there's a difference between somebody who's learned something in a classroom and then somebody who's learned it and applied it. And so I think it's really important that you just take that leap and step. And I remember the first program eval that I did, I had no idea what I was doing, but I found this nonprofit in the town that I was living in. And I said, I'd love to do a mixed methods program evaluation. I went on Amazon and I bought a whole bunch of textbooks related to it. I self-taught myself, and then I married what I learned in my stats class and everything to come together and develop basically a full analysis of everything that the organization was doing and where they had areas for opportunity. And the leadership of that organization took it and made changes to the services that they were offering. So it's very, very real world implications. I've touched on this, but attend network events across your campus. So there's mixers, right? If it's the business, I don't know, let's say the Student Business Association is hosting softball tournament for let's just use as an example. Like, you might not be involved in that organization, but if there's an open invitation, you should definitely go, because you can make small talk, you can get to know people, you can see what interests they have. And like Dr. A said earlier, they may go on to start a startup, you know, or they may be in a position. And I always tell people, you never ever know who's going to be your next boss, and you never ever know who you're going to hire. Those are the two rules that I live by. So treat everyone as if they're going to have a job for you in a couple of months or a couple of years, or that they're going to have so much value that you're going to want to hire them on your team. So attending network events is critical, especially across diverse groups. It's going to make you very well-rounded. Those experiences, if you do even go on into clinical practice, will be very helpful for you to understand your client base just a little bit more. Joining student groups outside of your discipline is also important. Don't get me wrong, please join the Student Psychology Club, please join the Future Psychologist Club, all of those, but also look at other opportunities, because if you have an interest in, I don't know, becoming a consultant at a top 3 firm, then maybe you should look at the student accounting group or the student tech software group, because if anything, you'll be learning while you're building those connections. We talked about identifying mentors from outside of the social sciences. I think it's important. I'm even seeing more and more students reaching out to me who are in the humanities or just outside of psych and soc or in anthro or other fields, who are like, you know, we feel that a lot of our theoretical frameworks are rooted in Western ideologies, and how do we collaborate together to make sure we are providing sensitive services. And so reach out. I think it's really, really important. You know, I don't think there's enough time, unfortunately, for all of us to go on and get a PhD and an MPH and an MSc and all of those. But if you can collaborate, you can still achieve your goals. And then having open dialogue with your faculty members about their connections, right? I have to give Natalie some credit. I just got a phone notification for the LinkedIn invite, so thank you. But, you know, I think that's important, because let's say Natalie is working on a project that I know nothing about, but I know 5 people who do know a lot about that. I can put Natalie in touch with them. So remember that the connection is not always going to be your end point. The connection can be the beginning as well. And a lot of times those are what are really meaningful. And thinking back, for those of you who are working on a dissertation or master's thesis, you know, make sure you choose your committees wisely for those who have a little bit of discretion, because now a lot of my co-PIs on some major studies that I'm doing were on my committee, and we were able to build and keep those relationships. So remember that your faculty, your research supervisors, it's not a goodbye after you complete the program. If you do it right, they'll be there as colleagues to you after you graduate, and that's invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Yes, and I wanted to echo the comment about LinkedIn. I got like 2 or 3 requests already. So guys, keep them coming. I'll accept you as they come in. So yes, that's the point. Be active on LinkedIn. Regularly add people. Post, comment, right? Cold calling, cold emailing. This kind of goes back to the point that I was just bringing up in terms of you know, emailing professors in other schools, right? Emailing people also. DMing them on Twitter or other forms of social media, contact them on LinkedIn. Yeah, not everyone, you know, the cold calling, cold emailing, you have to really approach it with the right mindset, right? And it's really a numbers game. So I'm making up this number, but you know, out of like 10 people that you contact, maybe you'll hear back from 1 or from 2, right? Or out of 100 people that you contact, you'll hear back from 10 or 15. That's amazing, right? Or you may hear back from 5 out of 100, and that is amazing too. I think it's not about the ratio or the proportion, you know, and if you hit for 100%, obviously it's not gonna work, but it's about, can I at least get a few leads here, right? And I think sort of many times we send one email, you know, we send a 3-paragraph long email, we stress about everything that we say, we, put our hopes into that one email and then we never hear back from it. And I think sort of playing the numbers game, both in terms of how many people you reach out to and also keeping your messages short so that people can actually quickly get a sense of who you are, what you need, what you're asking for, that can be really, 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 really helpful. Join professional organizations. Those are really, really useful things to do. Every professional organization that I've ever been a member of, as a student, as a professor, as a professional, they're always looking for more people to get involved and help out, whether it's like, the main boards or committees or subcommittees. There's always, again, this goes back to the point of like, very few people will turn down free labor, right, in a way. So go and not only just join your organization, but actually get involved with various groups, committees, subcommittees, special interest groups, whatever they're called in different organizations as well. Also look into professional organizations outside of psychology. I know there's a lot of conferences and, I guess now we're going back to traveling places. And when, I know it gets really expensive. All these conferences are ridiculously expensive. So between the travel, the hotel, the registration fees, the food, I know it adds up. And I know grad students get paid nothing, and that sucks. That's a conversation for another forum, and we can take that in different angles as well. So I understand it's not so easy to be like, I'm gonna go to like 10 conferences or 5 conferences or probably more than one conference anyway a year, but at least like joining other organizations, if nothing else, just to be on the listserv. And I'm guessing there's going to be a fair amount of conferencing that is going to keep happening virtually, or at least some program offerings will continue to happen virtually in the next few years. So that's also something that is very worth looking into. For example, there we have a random one there, the American Marketing Association. What are ways in which marketers talk about psychology? What are ways in which marketers talk about consumer behavior, right? That's one example. There's also many, many events and things that have to do with startups, and that of course cuts across a number of industries as well. So like joining different organizations could be really, really helpful. Again, this is a big regret, right? In grad school, being so focused on the psychology conferences and presenting our research, that's great. But then there's other conferences that you could attend just to learn, because most likely you're not going to be presenting a paper at a marketing conference, right? At least not just yet. And if you go to a startup conference where everybody who's talking in a panel is like an employee at a startup, obviously you're also not going to be presenting, but maybe that's okay. Maybe there are conferences that you can go to purely as a consumer, purely as a member of the audience to learn from others, right? We're very focused on, we do both, right? We go to conferences to learn stuff, but also to present, and that's fine. But maybe there's another set of conferences or professional activities or societies that you can engage with from a different perspective, and that's fine too. You don't have to be the one creating content for everything. I guess sometimes it's okay to go to other things and other places and other disciplines and just consume content. Yeah, and then again, kind of coming back to a previous point that we were making before, the idea of volunteering, doing pro bono work, NGOs, local organizations, and maybe doing things for the community, really just anything, just to continue developing your skills. And again, it doesn't have to be, I think part of the mistake that I've made and that I've seen people make over the years is like, we think that it has to be a mental health organization, right? Like NAMI. And listen, that's obviously perfectly fine if you want to go volunteer for NAMI or for the Trevor Project or for many other wonderful organizations that do mental health. But it doesn't have to be just that. Again, it kind of comes back to my point before that you could be the one psychologist in the team, right? It could be something that is completely unrelated. It could be an NGO that has to do with homelessness, right? Or that has to do with providing services to underserved populations, say underserved children in a particular area, right? And again, it's sort of like thinking outside the box and challenging yourself to broaden your horizons in that perspective.
Agreed. And before we move on, I know Jamal had a really good question in the chat, and it's super, super important. So I want to answer it and address it now. But in essence, the question was, are there certifications or things we can do while in a graduate program or shortly thereafter that would bolster a PhD without us going back to get another degree? And the answer is yes. but you have to look for them because you pave your own way. So what I mean by that is if you know your goal is to go into business, look at things like becoming a certified project manager or a project management professional, PMP certification. If your goal is to go the HR route, look at SHRM, with the Society of Human Resource Management, and become certified through their credentialing process. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, there are ways, but of course, there's no one size fits all. So think about your goal, think about the organizations that will help get you there. If your goal is to work in marketing, in marketing consulting, then look at the AMA and see what credentials they might offer. And then that way you can concurrently begin studying or reading or preparing yourself. So that way, when you do graduate, you have a PhD bolstered with being a certified project manager, which really sets you apart even from somebody who has an MBA, because you have the human behavior aspect and the business side. So of course, good question, but I think the certifications can be lined up. That can be as simple as running a Google search of common credentials in that field, to talking with faculty in that department to ask them. That's a good conversation starter. Hey, I'm in the PhD program over in the College of Social Sciences, but after graduation, I want to do X, Y, and Z. What are some other credentials you would recommend that I work on? So that's my little 2 cents there before I forgot the question. So of course, I think on this slide, really there is intersectionality between clinical and non-clinical coursework. And what we mean by this is we're not telling you that if you choose to take a career path outside of clinical psychology, you're going to leave behind everything you ever knew and learned, and you're going to do something totally different. So I think that it's important for us, as clinicians, to go on outside of the industry. And we really have this inherent responsibility to educate, to share information, to weave in what we've learned, kind of as, I think of everything outside, every challenge is an adaptive challenge, which can be solved in a number of different ways. And we cannot use technical solutions to solve adaptive challenges. And I'll be really, really honest with you, and Dr. A, from her consulting experience, I'd say this is not evidence-based, but 80 to 90% of problems or challenges that any company experience go back to people and people operations and people management. That's why consultants exist, because if we could solve everything with the software and click submit and check a box, then companies would have already done that. So at the core, they need people who understand people, who can interact with people, and who better than psychologists to do that. So, utilizing information about CBT, DBT, whatever your preferred psychotherapy methodology is, you can incorporate that. And then, of course, the same for broader consulting. So stress management, well-being, HR, and, right now, one of the projects I'm working on is developing well-being programming for 500 veterinarians. And obviously, my boss, who is our chief operating officer, has an MBA, and our CEO has an MBA, but it's tough for them to understand the link. And so as psychologists, we have an obligation to help educate them and let them know, what is our reason or our method. And then I think in line with that, similarly, which Dr. A is a pro at, so be in touch with her if you have questions, but it's content creation for education on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, developing a blog, things like if you go into sports psychology, making sure that you understand that there is money tied to that at the end of the day, and athletes need to be able to perform, if they're on a professional team, and all of the implications that come with that. And then, of course, applying your clinical coursework to macro level adaptive projects. And that really starts at the beginning. And it's, of course, psychology, just inherent to the discipline, focuses on the individual. But the more you can engage yourself in large scale studies or in, I'm a qualitative researcher, so interpretive phenomenological analysis and understanding lived experiences of a sample to develop interventions. It's really, really important, I think, because at the end of the day, we're only going to be as effective as we are able to communicate. And I think that's the key here, is being able to communicate. I think we've all, there's always the debate of, there are some brilliant medical doctors out there who I would trust if I needed brain surgery to the end of time. But the minute they walk in to tell me what they're going to do, I understand nothing, and it's full of jargon and it stresses me out. And I just feel a disconnect. So think of yourself the same way, that you have to be able to take your years and years of education and remove the jargon and speak to people in the language that they speak and they're able to connect with. So that's a little bit about intersectionality. So if anybody is freaking out right now telling you that you're going through this PhD program only to never use it, calm down. You're going to use it every single day, but it's not going to be in client sessions or in the traditional way that you might think of practicing psychology looks.
Right, awesome. I was at the chat window, so chatting away. People are sending some cool questions as well, which we can save a bit of time for at the end. So this, okay, so let me just take one step back, kind of, create a bit of a transition moment here. We've been talking a lot, I think, so far in terms of like all the things to expand your horizon, to sort of broaden opportunities, to reach out and do more, to connect more people, to explore things. Now we're sort of going to be like, but don't do it too much, and make sure that you pace yourself, right? And make sure that you're sort of doing a lot of this outreach in a way that is outreach and networking in a way that is thoughtful and mindful, and again, sort of pacing yourself. So much like what I said at the very beginning, you can do all of this stuff by spending an hour or two a week. You don't have to all of a sudden freak out, pull an all-nighter tonight, and and write 5 blog posts, friend 200 people on LinkedIn, and do a million other things, right? So we also wanted to sort of give you some of our perspective too on sort of how to balance all of these roles, right? Because if you're purely doing the research track or purely doing the clinical track, or even if you're doing both, it's fairly contained. So you don't have to think of how to balance. But if you're going to start branching out and doing more things and pursuing different opportunities, there's a lot of balancing that is going to be needed, right? So the first thing that we always like to talk about is prioritizing. You are all incredibly smart and driven, and you could probably do most things that you set yourself to do, but you're not going to if you set too many things, right? If your to-do list is too long, it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how talented you are, how many skills you have, how many people you know, how much money you have. At some point, you're not going to be able to get through everything, right? So the key to always being successful is to find that balance between doing things that you are driven to do, that drive you, that you feel passionate about, but also being able to have some structure and prioritizing. So don't go running and do everything right now. Set some goals, right? What are you doing for the summer? What extracurriculars or networking opportunities are you pursuing in the summer? Which ones in the fall? Which ones in the winter? Which ones in the spring? I mean, that could be one way of setting it up. There's many other ones, right? But how do you actually give yourself structure, right? And to be honest, what I like to do with all my activities, this is what the consulting instilled in me. There's a joke that consultants do everything with spreadsheets. Also with slides, but also with spreadsheets. And I literally have spreadsheets of my to-do list where things get numbers, from 1 to 10 in terms of priority, and things change over time, and they get ranked, and they get re-ranked, and they get broken up into smaller things, or they get collapsed into bigger things. You don't have to do it with that level of nuttiness, although why not? You're all scientists. I'm sure you all have a love for some good data and a nice spreadsheet here and there, but nonetheless, like there's a bit of like adding some method to the madness, so that you don't feel so that you don't end up feeling like you're drowning or that you're doing too much. So prioritizing is key, and again, there's many ways of doing it. Again, you can do it sort of based on time, based on semester, based on setting aside 2 or 3 hours a week of time aside that you're setting up for extracurricular things or networking activities. So finding different ways of actually prioritizing and balancing things can be really, really important. These are things, particularly, if you're a professor, if you're teaching, you know, trying to not take, I know most of you guys are students at this point, but for the future, it's helpful. The first few years as a professor, whether you're in a liberal arts school, whether you're in an R1, you know, from a liberal arts school to like an R1 university to sort of being on a faculty at a medical school or like a public health school on a more soft money component, they're all brutal anyway. Just because you taught some classes as a grad student is not the same when you're, you know, when you're a professor. The level of responsibility, the expectations change tremendously. The amount of service that will slowly sneak up on you will be also unbelievable. And you're probably going to want to do a very good job in a place where nobody knows you, right? So the stakes, it's almost like starting grad school all over again, but the stakes are a little bit higher. I know, if you can believe it. And the expectations are also a bit higher, right? So setting ourselves time maybe for the first, you know, for the first few years to be very, very diligent. And this is also something that I was mentioning before about grad school, right? The idea of like, okay, maybe for the first couple of years, just try to narrowly focus a lot on getting the master's done, and then begin, you know, getting your classes and your master's and your beginnings of clinical training. And then over time begin to sort of like branch out, right? So the same idea that we were talking about before is reflected here if we think about it once you hit to the next level, to the next step in your career. You know, and then there's also like different ways of teaching, right, as well. Again, we tend to think of like the three options that I just mentioned, like liberal arts, R1 institution, and sort of like a medical school, public health, you know, that type of setting. But again, there's many, many other ways of teaching these days. As we have experienced in the past year and a half, a lot has gone virtual, a lot has gone online. There's a lot of things that you can pursue in terms of doing online courses, you know, that you can set up yourself, right? That you can do through platforms that are existing, things like Coursera and things along those lines, but you can also do them on your own. And again, here's where leveraging the network and connecting with people in various parts of the world can be particularly helpful. So if you're on Twitter, you're gonna have many Twitter friends and followers and whatnot, who may be in different parts of the world, you know, where they don't, maybe the universities there, they don't have access to the type of research and the type of clinical science approach that we bring to psychology here. So your knowledge could be incredibly valuable in various parts of the world as well. So sort of connecting and sort of keeping an open mind that maybe you do teach a class online, and that's okay. We've all done it in the past year and a half, and you know, pros and cons, right? It's a lot easier than we thought. It's not perfect, and it's incredibly challenging in many ways, but it's doable. So there's no reason that you couldn't pursue one of those gigs or actually build that as a side career for yourself as well. And then I have one more point that is super important. Assuming most of you guys are clinical in clinical training, no matter what you do, some of you might not do internship, and that's fine. There may be some reasons going into that. But if you go through the process of internship, so if you put yourself through the excruciating pain that comes with the match, you know, and again, we can talk about it at another time in another version of the conference. But if you're gonna go through that and go through match and actually do the internship, please go through the steps of getting licensed. Getting licensed is something that, in my experience, if you don't do it right away, you're never going to do it because it is so painful in so many ways that if you don't do it during your postdoc years, or like me, I skipped postdoc, so I did all my EPPP studying and all that incredibly awfully painful stuff in my first year as a professor, which was very challenging, I have to say. I passed, by the way, so that worked out, but it was very, very challenging. But if I hadn't done it then, I don't know that I would have ever found the time. There's some things that developmentally, if you don't do right away, you probably won't. So getting those clinical hours and getting the EPPP and any additional licensing, you know, there's usually many states require an additional test, but those are really easy. Those you memorize and stuff for a few hours and it's fine. The really big hurdle is actually the EPPP because that's just like sitting and memorizing. The clinical hours, you'll accrue them, you know, when you're postdoc. In many states, you can also count some research hours. So like, there's a lot of flexibility in the counting of postdoctoral hours that usually is not the biggest hurdle. And especially if you do a postdoc, the really big issue is going to be the studying for the EPPP, that if you don't do it at that point in your life, it's just sort of like never going to happen. And the reason that is really important is because being licensed will always open a lot of doors for you. Even if you don't ever want to see clients again because you're like, I'm done, not for me. Being licensed for like you supervise. So maybe you really like teaching, right? Or maybe as part of your duties in your job, you see an opportunity to do a bit more teaching and get out of doing some other service that you don't want to do. You know, in many schools, actually, supervision counts for as much as teaching full classes. And some people really prefer that, to have 2 or 3 grad students that they supervise on a weekly basis versus having to lecture in front of hundreds of undergrads with all that comes with that in terms of the good, the bad, and the everything in between, right? So it's a very important door. I think every time that I look at a program, I feel like the statistic tends to be 70 to 80% people get licensed. I don't know if that actually cuts across as an average nationwide, but every time that I look at the clinical outcome data of any program that I'm looking into for various reasons, that seems to be the number for me. So I'm gonna assume, if somebody has a number, let me know, but like I'm gonna assume it's probably 70 or 80%. And I'm like, the 20 or 30% of people who go through internship presumably and don't get licensed, it feels like a big waste. And listen, you can still have a very successful career without getting licensed, obviously, but it's shutting a very important door. And you know, if we think of the theme of today as sort of doing everything you can in grad school and beyond to open doors for yourself, it's a really important one to do. Even if you've decided, again, you never want to see a client in your life, you can still do a lot of supervision and trainings that you wouldn't be able to do without a license. So yep, so anyway, that was my spiel there. So in case anyone has any question, please go get licensed. That's the takeaway there. But Dr. V, I'll pass on the microphone to you.
All right, thanks, Dr. A. I know we only have a very short amount of time left, and we have a lot of material to get through still. So if it's okay, Lauren, I think we're just going to continue speaking very quickly through the Q&A session. And if you have specific questions after the session, of course, we have the Pocket Lab, but then please also email us. So the next, we're really going to get into more tactical, technical tips, and I apologize in advance. I'm going into my lecture mode where I'm now going to be speaking pretty quickly so we can get through this. But of course, for those of you interested in non-clinical careers, of course, your CV should be limited to 2 pages if you're applying for a non-academic or non-research position. As many of you probably know, CVs can become 10 to 15 pages. You don't need to list all of your publications, all of that. For those of you interested in transitioning your current CV into what I call a corporate CV, please let us know. We'd be happy to help you and help share what's critical and what needs to be there. Of course, your education, your career history, skills, and then your relevant publications only. And then also, I think it's important to focus on the skill section being on outcome versus process. And what we mean by that is providing as much explanation, because I'll tell you, unfortunately, there is a stigma outside of academia or outside of research that those with PhDs are overqualified for the positions that they're recruiting for. And so basically, if you're able to take what you can do, again, this goes back to being able to communicate. And let's say you have experience with coding, saying I wrote 5 pieces of code that helped do X, Y, and Z is going to get you far more interviews than simply saying I've become proficient in programming language. Because honestly, those with engineering degrees or computer degrees are saying the same thing. So think about how you can set yourself apart. And then the HR professionals that are reviewing your resumes, right? So they are trained in their career to be able to look for brevity and clarity, and so avoid technical jargon. I think it's important. Of course, running a draft of your resume by friends, significant others, family members who are outside of your discipline is very important, and saying, hey, is there anything in here that you don't understand? And if they do, say something like, oh, this doesn't make sense, even to you if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense to them, then it's probably not going to make sense to an HR professional who's reviewing your resume. And then I also, like we talked about, think about how you can help the HR team or the recruitment team understand how your education is going to apply to the job that you're applying for. And just, I think in the chat a bit ago, I saw somebody is interested in going into digital behavioral health consulting. And so on your CV, you should illustrate how your education applies to digital behavioral health, rather than how your education applies to psychology or how your CV applies to consulting. You need to be specific. We review so many resumes every day, but if you can say, I've achieved X, Y, and Z certification while I was in my PhD program, I have volunteer experience in the digital behavioral health space, and here's how I'm going to apply that to your organization, that's what they want to see. Keep in mind, organizations are looking for revenue return. So if you can help them understand how your skill set is going to help them bring in revenue or save revenue, you're going to have far more likelihood of getting that role. And again, the value addition is important. You know how much value you have, but now you have to show them how much value you can bring to them. And the way to do that is not to simply list everything you've done. That's showing the value that you have. Rather, you need to switch your mindset to, here's what I have, but here's how it's going to help you. I think that's critical for non-clinical, non-research careers. Dr. A?
Yep, sorry, running the chat a little bit here. Yes, and then this is also something that, feel free, guys, to reach out if you have additional questions, but keep things short, sweet, and to the point. There's also the idea of like reading diagonally. Assume most people are not going to read everything you write. So the more paragraphs you write, the more you're going to lose people. So especially in like industry context and non-academic context, literally using bullet points can actually be very, very helpful. So keep your cover letter short, keep your emails short, keep your communications short and to the point. And then, think of like how always frame things in the positive and the bridge, meaning like, nobody wants to hear how the stuff you did doesn't work for what they're doing. Nobody wants to hear that, oh, like I did this thing, but blah, blah, blah. But everyone wants to hear how what you've done connects with what they're doing. I think if you're hiring somebody, like even think if you're trying to bring a research assistant into your lab, right? Say your advisor tells you to interview, and then you interview 2 candidates. One of them is like, well, I was a history major until last week, so I don't know anything about psychology, right? Versus another kid who says, well, last year I took my first psychology class and I decided to switch out of history and I love psychology and I'm so excited because some of the stuff that I learned in history really excited me, I don't know, to like better think of like human behavior, and I read this book and something, right? Same story, right? It's the same history major who's just like switching majors, but the second kid is a lot more likely to get the RA gig, right, in a way. So when you do it yourself, think about it in the same way, right? Think about what are the things that will make you really want to bring somebody into your lab or to simply want to work with someone. Again, think of your competition, think of how you're being set apart in the positives. Tell your story, always tell a nice story that is about winning and about how you overcame an obstacle. We all have things that are shortcomings. We all have issues, and that it's not the time to sort of like bring them up. Just tell a quick, short, successful story. You guys have a ton of successes already based on where you are in your developmental, training and trajectory. So nobody wants to hear that your paper got rejected, but it's still or that you don't have any papers yet, but it's pretty impressive that you gave a talk at a conference last year. So talk about that, right? So think of how to frame. That's the other thing, like people in industry, even with MBAs, have a very, very narrow set of things that they've done. So it's, in some ways, it makes it easier sometimes for them to tell their story of like, I work at this company and I did this and I got promoted and I went to MBA and I'm here. For you guys, because you're doing so much, there's all kinds of stories you can tell. So focus on all the wins, focus on all the positives, and tell the success story of your PhD. Now, one way of thinking about it is like everyone has a success story of their PhD and everyone has like the failure story of their PhD. I had a very successful paper when I was a grad student that got cited a lot and it was like a bit of a big deal. That's my success story. My dissertation, a total disaster. Nothing worked. None of the experiments replicated. Like my committee probably let me graduate because, I don't know, they probably wanted to get rid of me and they were like sick of me like coming and asking them questions about emotions and stuff. I didn't publish a single paper out of it. I think probably there was like a poster that I presented once out of my dissertation at ABCT, right? I'm the same person, it was my same PhD. What is the story that I want to tell, right? The really impactful paper that I had out of the dissertation that didn't really work at all, right? And think about it yourself, you have those too, right? So focusing, which is not lying, right? But it's focusing really on on the growth, right? On the growth mindset and like the things that have worked that well for you and that you've done well. And then do it in a different format very quickly. The 30-second, the 2-minute, and the 5-minute version I like to do of your elevator spiel. Again, as academics, we are long-winded. Obviously, that's what we are running over. But come up with, we will not be running over in a different context. But I think, sort of coming up with like, what's a 30-second version? What's a 2-minute and what's a 5-minute? That exercise, that's another piece of homework. So go friend people on Twitter and LinkedIn. That's the first one. The second one, think of your career, your goals, anything, and try to sum it up into the 30 seconds, the 2-minute, and the 5-minute. And you'll realize that it's actually really, really hard to do. It's harder than to write a long paper, but it will really sharpen you to think of like, okay, like really, what is my value in this context? Of wanting to do something in industry or this or that. What do I bring to the table? Dr. B.
Absolutely. So we have about a minute left. I'm going to skip all of this content, but you just know if you have a particular interest in going into NGOs, please email me your questions after the session. I'm happy to. Here, this is just a very fun first fundraiser that we did back in 2010. And really, if you're wondering how to take your skill set in clin sci or in really any field of psych over to NGOs or the government sector, please do reach out. I have a lot of colleagues also who work in the public sector, whether it's for the DEA or whatever it is. There are lots and lots of opportunities outside of it. And then, of course, within the nonprofit sector, there's consulting. You can go on to senior leadership roles, program management, direct support services. So again, remember, your job is not restricted to the title of psychologist or clinical psychologist or something of that note. You have to maybe get creative, especially after you graduate, and looking for the jobs that you want. Even just the key things like your search terms on Indeed or your search terms on various platforms can make all the difference, because if you're just going to search psychologist or clinical psychology, you're never going to come across positions that you're likely looking for. Of course, we'll wrap up then with taking your career beyond the classroom. Both Dr. A and I are passionate about international work. So look for international teaching opportunities. There are lots of institutions looking for qualified practitioners, especially with COVID-19. I just finished teaching a class at Kuwait University. It was on Zoom from midnight to 8 a.m. It was tough, but I had the opportunity to teach at a different university, learn about their culture. I've built networks, research partnerships. So remember, you're not limited to the United States. Look at organizations if you are going to pursue licensure with Doctors Without Borders. Look at Fulbright programs. Fulbright programs are great opportunities for both students and new graduates, as well as experienced professionals. I cannot stress this enough. Join international organizations like at the IU, at the International Union of Psychological Sciences, the Middle East Psychological Association. Especially right now, I can't tell you how many of myself and my students have attended international conferences, because everything's virtually and everything is on Zoom. So we're not getting on a plane and spending $5,000 to travel all the way across the world. So I think this is the future of the industry, and the network with scholars and faculty at other universities across countries. We'll leave this out, but here's our contact information, perhaps the most important. Please reach out to us. We're here, we're available, we're both passionate about this topic, and we're happy to help in any way. I know you've got to run to the next session, so an abbreviated goodbye is in order, but thanks for having us, and good luck to each of you with your studies and your future careers.